We're on chapter 6 of Adam Hamilton's Luke, and we've been discussing the life of Jesus. And, in a lot of ways it hasn't perfectly lined up with Lent, but it's a very Lenten book. I think he focuses on Jesus' trip to Jerusalem, and then why his coming, and why Jesus came to heal, why he takes this trip to Jerusalem. And now we're sort of getting to the culmination of it, so we're kind of lined up with Lent a little bit. This came to me as you all were giving prayer requests this morning. Well, this is how I was thinking of it, but I think I'm going to have to say it different. What institutions have you had to deal with? What institutions have you had to deal with that you feel like? What institutions have you had to deal with that you feel like need repair, need fixing? Have you? We talked this morning. We talked this morning about insurance companies. Have you dealt with places that need a little bit of subversion or a little bit of rethinking how they do things? An institution would be a corporation, a school, a college. An insurance company can fit that. Church can fit that. Government can fit. Have you dealt with anything where you felt like you had to be a part of changing some policy or changing some habits, and not just for yourself but for a whole place? Ever been involved in that? Think about it. I'm going to ask again in a second. Right when I first this just popped in my head. When I first met the people here at St. Stephen, one of the people I met very early on was Brad Bass. Do you all remember Brad?
Yeah.
Brad worked for Land O'Lakes, and he worked at a Land O'Lakes owned facility in Kent. And part of what he did for Land O'Lakes was kind of redirecting, repurposing, establishing these places that Land O'Lakes would take over. So Land O'Lakes would make a purchase of I don't remember exactly what they did, but they would make some sort of food product or something. And when it became, not everything was butter. He did this with Cheetos, and he did this with some other. So they buy these places, and then they have a corporate identity, and they want the places that are purchased to become part of that identity and that marketing and that direction and that quality. And so Brad was sort of the guy who would go in and kind of try to reestablish the institution. And a lot of that would involve renovation, and it would involve updating the facilities and training with people who work there, and then insisting on a certain type of quality. Or have you all ever been involved in that sort of? You're a part of a organization that you work for or that you go to school with, and you a part of some kind of institutional change.
In the 70s, our school went from no representation to a union, and it involved a lot of that stuff, and it didn't just happen overnight. It took several years.
So establishing and then all becoming a part of a unionizing. You're right. Talking about unionizing. Any other time that you've tried to change a social thing, or have you turned on the news lately?
I know. Yes. I'm afraid so.
Has the news, even if you didn't turn it on, invaded your space lately?
Absolutely.
Yeah, so I would say lots of people trying for lots of, sometimes not synchronistic, it doesn't sync up, but lots of people trying for lots of social, institutional changes.
I did.
Okay, what'd you do?
I was the coordinator of a student assistance program, and we dealt with students who had drug and alcohol problems, mental health problems, and suicide ideations. So it was my job to change their atmosphere along with their parents. I had more problems with the parents than I did with the kids.
This one is I have the same 100 go-to stories, and so you've heard this one before. A lot of ELCA pastors spend a lot of time with something called family systems, and I've spent quite a bit with that. And that the way that started, that things aren't just one person, that like something that happens in your family or in your congregation can affect. Someone can pass away that's related to someone you go to church, and that can affect your day, week, month behavior. How things sort of interlink. The way that got started was by a guy named Murray Bowen, who worked in Maryland at a facility. Now I'm forgetting what people had. It was an inpatient facility, and now the word of what they all had. So anyway, the people were living there, and he was trying to provide treatment, and he felt that it didn't get him very far. And like once a month they would have a family visit, and he went into this and he started to see how like moms, dads sitting with the inpatient, like the next day in the meeting, they would be in a bad mood or in a good mood, or they would slip back into bad habits. And he started to spend time with the parents as much as the person in the inpatient, and he felt that if he could talk to them about some of the ways sometimes they would say or do or stress out or do something, that it would affect the person who he felt like it was hard to get any traction with people. They had pretty severe mental health things, but he was finding that once the people in their life understood what they were doing, it would affect the people that he was trying to help, and that started this whole family systems thing. So you can sort of watch how things, for sure, churches are interlinked. What happens to people in their lives can affect what happens to us when we gather. So that's a little bit of what I hear you talking about. I think people are trying for all sorts of, and they have all sorts of theories, and God bless them. God bless people who want to run for school board or city council or things that they want to put their time inordinately, not compensated anywhere near, and they want to be hopeful and they want to give their time to things, and they're trying to help an institution. Many of you, if you don't live in Stowe, know Stowe. I know you don't all live here, but Stowe has, I've only really kind of come to know it for 10 years. My sense of Stowe is that it's in a time of huge change, and the identity of what people think Stowe is and who lives here is not quite aligned anymore. I think this happens in a lot of communities, but it happens a lot here. It shocks people when I tell them that we had a person who moved into the clothing shed for a while, just had nowhere to go and was living in the clothing shed in the parking lot.
Oh my.
And it blows people's mind that I'm saying that and stuff.
My goodness.
Yeah, and that happens in a lot of communities where they're like, we don't have hungry people. I think Stowe has, in a lot of ways, aged. Homes have sort of moved over to another generation of people, and some of those people are in need that's different than the need that Stowe's used to. And so, I think what we think of as Stowe and what happens here, like the food bank and who comes to it, there's sort of societal things to think about. Anybody else have any other story, interaction with this?
When I worked at the state hospital, the nursing protocol manual was so outdated. There were actually protocols that never were written, and some of them hadn't been revised for like 10 years. And the day shift nursing supervisors were supposed to have rewritten this, and they never did. And so the other nurse supervisor on night shift and I rewrote the entire nurse protocol manual because nobody else would do it. And it took us like a good 6 months.
It takes a long
On-
time to change
on
that
the
kind of stuff.
on the so were you there after the nurse protocol handbook, or when it was completed? Were you there?
Oh
after?
yeah, I was there for several years.
Okay, so
after.
how did the after it was completed? How did it go?
It was followed, because when you have protocols, they're required to be followed. And we had gone from, when I first worked there, we didn't have joint commission. We were a social model hospital. We were not medical model. We were not joint commission. We were not Medicare approved. And we went through the whole process of becoming Medicare approved. And then, so we had to do this to be in compliance with them. And so then, I mean, you'd go to, like, say, you had a patient with a seizure disorder. There was no protocol to follow for a patient with a seizure disorder. Or a patient, like, you should have had a protocol to follow for a patient who was an insulin-dependent diabetic. And you can find these protocols to follow. And so we had to, find through, and we didn't have access to computers at that time. We had to network and find them through the libraries in nursing journals and find what the protocols were that we needed and write them for our nursing protocol.
So a few weeks ago in the lectionary, I don't remember which Sunday. It was pretty recent. I did the Aesop fable, and that text for that Sunday was from Luke 13, and Jesus is one of the key verses in Luke is in 9:51. It says Jesus set his face to Jerusalem. So before that, he's kind of says stuff, and people don't always agree with him, but it's not real serious. The opposition to him is not very serious. He sets his face to Jerusalem immediately after hearing John the Baptist has been put to death. And so the seriousness ramps up. And I talked about in 13 that they say don't go there, Herod, that fox wants to kill you. And he says, no prophet can be killed outside of Jerusalem. I'm going to go there. And I did this in the Preparing for Sunday. That's utterly untrue. Lots of prophets were killed outside of Jerusalem. He's not really saying, he's talking something about the symbol of what Jerusalem is. A prophet can't be killed outside of the trying to fix this system. Now, Jerusalem's really a place, so I'm not trying to say it's not, but when he talks like that, when he says that, he's saying something about, I'm about to go after big fish. And I've done a lot of healings, and I've done a lot of caring and interacting with people, and today you're saved in this healing. But his face gets set to Jerusalem. 13 is obviously after 9, so he's on his way to Jerusalem. When we get to where Hamilton is this week with chapter 6, he's titled this Crucified with Outlaws. And so there's a lot of talk here about outlaws, but I think it's important that deeper than that, I've said this a few weeks ago and many weeks in here, when Jesus can go up to people and heal them and say, today you're healed, if he's able to do that, what's the point of going to Jerusalem then? If he's able to save you, if he's able to save people who need something when they come up to him, he really didn't need to go to Jerusalem. He can just save them right there. He needs to go to Jerusalem because the whole system is not right.
Well, the Sanhedrin is there.
Right.
And so if you want to change the system, you have to go where the system is
At great risk.
At great risk for that.
And he understands the risk. Going back to this 13, his response about Herod is going to try to kill you, which is they're basically saying if you mess with the powers that be, and you mess with, maybe it's not the same as a policy book, but if you mess with the institution messes with you. You know, it has rules and thing, and especially this one, Jesus, you're going to be in trouble. And his response is, tell that fox, I'll be here, I'll be healing people, I'm on the way, and I'll be healing people on the way, and I'm coming. And this is a real delicate issue for Christians to think about. We're not Jesus, so it's real important to lay that one down there. It seems super obvious. We're not Jesus. So, like, especially a lot of clergy people, you know, will sit around and start to take on themselves like this stuff, like, it's so important that I do this, and they're, you know, get yourself killed for that. It doesn't mean you're not called to it. It just means just because Jesus did things for us and for society, there's been martyrs. Just be really thoughtful of if you're trying. We're not going to be able to be Jesus, but the idea that there's a whole sort of broken system that Jesus needed to address. That is not how Hamilton outlines this one. He talks about it as connecting with outlaws, and we're going to talk about the chapter. But I think the big piece of what Jesus is doing with outlaws is he's siding with people that the institution has said are not insiders. So when we get to this thing where Jesus is siding with outlaws, that's what I'm saying, that because that's what Hamilton calls them. He's into Jerusalem, and he's building a cohort of people that bring the new heaven. It's trying to establish. It's an institutional thing. So, you know, we had 2 or 3 during prayer requests. We'll sue insurance companies. You know, tongue in cheek or serious, because some of the times it's serious. That's not an easy calling, and that's what Jesus and some of the and then I'll get into the chapter. I'll make sure I say this too. I think one of the biggest issues we have is the system that Jesus is inserting himself into does not necessarily completely correlate to the system that people here will say, well, I'm going to go fix it. An insurance company is not the same as Jerusalem in the time of Jesus. It doesn't mean we're not called to do greater good for more people, but I just want to make sure it's hard. Sometimes people will be like, well, Jesus called me, and they'll do this big thing. And you know, like fighting Rome for Jesus and fighting Jerusalem is not a direct correlation sometimes to the way people campaign now for Jesus to fight the institution. You have to be really careful about this. This is a really serious one, and you have to be careful about it. Anything you hear or want to talk about in any of that? Have you known people who are crusaders, like, you know, Christian people who take on some fight or some? I think in some ways to establish an orphanage deals with the system and the institution, and that can be difficult. You ever met people or a church or an organization that does this sort of thing? I think ELCA synods do this a lot. Okay, so I wanted to make sure I gave some background, because I know he calls it outlaws, but I think there's a greater reason why he's connecting with it. This is, you know, why bother to sit with outlaws? He's identifying people that I think have been made vulnerable by a system he doesn't agree with. Now, he's not saying they're innocent. I mean, he knows when there's a criminal next to him on the cross that's a criminal. I think he's clear on that. But he's also saying, you know, if you're convicted by a bad system, you know, we got to start somewhere of healing and fixing. And so he identifies with these group of people. And so there becomes a lot of talk of Sanhedrin, scribes, Pharisees, Roman soldiers, criminals, a lot of institutional things. The chapter starts on 110, which gives you a map of Jerusalem, which is always, I don't know if you all are map people. I am not a great map person. I'm not always good at, I like a good map, but I like to have them and look things up. So this is a nice reference if you're getting into the Holy Week readings and into Easter, and you're kind of wondering what things look like, or there's a lot of jostling of Jesus. How about that? There's some J's for you. Jostling of Jesus in the final couple days before the crucifixion. He's back and forth to all these people. He goes to see, and here's a drawing of where he's going back and forth between. I don't know how this fits what I'm talking about per se, but I've made a note of this, and because this is another really, really important Luke verse. This is one of those, like, if you're trying to explain what Luke is about, this is the thesis statement of Luke. And he talks about it on page 112, and it's Luke 19:10. In Mark 10:45, Jesus says, "I've come as a ransom for many." And the whole story of Mark is about Jesus being crucified in place of other people. But this is where in Luke, Jesus says, "The Son of Man came to seek and save the lost." So his purpose is sort of different. And you can see how that sums up the whole book. The way Hamilton's been talking about it, that's what Jesus is doing. He's done it with all the people that are sick and ill or whatever that come to him. It's gotten him in trouble with the scribes and Pharisees. This Sunday's text is from Luke 15. And Luke 15 starts out with... he's still on the way to Jerusalem, and he says, eats with sinners, and the scribes and Pharisees come up and complain. And this is the thesis statement. The Son of Man came to seek, so not just sit here and hope that they find me, but to seek them and to save them. And he can save them by, today I've saved you with this healing, this... we get, after this eats with sinners and the Pharisees questioning him, we get the prodigal son text this Sunday in church, where he explains what it looks like to seek and to save the lost. And we'll talk about that more on Sunday, but turning his face to Jerusalem is when things get ramped up in the book. 19:10 is, like, if anybody ever says, well, what's Luke about? Luke 19:10. Jesus came to seek and save the lost. You can see how that fits the whole rest of it. All right, so did any of you underline or note anything throughout this chapter that we want to talk about?
Jesus is convicted as a criminal. He is considered a criminal in, whether Pilate says you are or didn't say you did, or the people ask for him to be crucified. I think the fact that he was considered an outlaw and a criminal, that's why he died a death of crucifixion.
And the death part is where it elevates from one person's thing to the whole idea of having all these rules. That scribes and Pharisees have all these rules that to be holy you have to follow them really well, and that excludes a bunch of a lot of rules on what to eat cost money. So if the scribes and Pharisees have all these rules about how to eat well or stay clean or how to be holy, all those things would require buying the right kind of food. Have any of you ever been on a restricted diet or some kind of doctor-ordered diet? That requires time.
Story of my life.
Right. So you can't be you can't be at work and searching out the new way to do these diet needs you have. You can't be broke and pay for the stuff that you need to buy that's specialized or different. They're automatically excluding the people that Jesus is saying he's come to seek and save. And so especially when he gets to Jerusalem now, he's starting to identify with people that are clearly outside the law. And it's upping the ante from just illness to now the whole Roman occupation, the whole system of the religious system that has basically learned how to thrive under Roman rule. He's after it because he thinks it excludes people. In a lot of ways, Jesus here looks like Martin Luther. The reason that the Reformation happened, for my money, is that Martin Luther felt that people in Germany were being asked to send money they didn't have for basilicas in Rome. And he said, well, people are over here dying and can barely eat, but you're coming around and telling them that, you know, they can get something in the next life. And then he went to Rome, and everybody's walking around not working with like 7 illegitimate children running around, and he's like, this is built on the back of all these peasants and all these people who work in fields, and the whole resetting the system. Many people tried it before Luther, they died. Luther came super close to dying.
I have something I was thinking about a lot in here, because on page 128, when Jesus responds to the one criminal, when he wants him to be with him, and he says, Jesus responds to the man, I assure you that today you will be with me in paradise. And I always wondered about that, because, you know, when I think of the paradise, I think, oh, something beautiful, something way up there, and I thought, well, you know, you didn't really go into the paradise, but the way the author states it, he says, in first century Judaism, Hades or Sheol was the realm of the dead. Within that realm, there was a place of suffering for unrighteousness dead called Gehenna, and there was a place for the righteous dead called paradise. So that kind of explained it to me about what the paradise meant.
Are any of you people that have visited Columbus? You've been around the Columbus area? Mm-hmm. Isn't this a Columbus suburb?
Gehenna?
Gehenna.
Oh, it's Gehenna. It's not quite. It's not quite the same thing.
Close,
Okay,
but
all right.
no cigar.
I wasn't sure if it was in Columbus or if it was some. Okay, and this is a whole.
Yeah, same thing, only it's different spelling.
It is. It's a little different. I think the difference is a big deal, though, because the way that Gehenna is spelled makes it not Gehenna, the place of the dead. It makes it like by the river. I think Gehenna means by the river or something, and Gehenna means place of the dead. So that E and A is a big deal. Especially when Pastor Kaufman was here with you all, which I want to say was about a year, give or take, in between Pastor Cubbin's passing. There was a few months of, I'm sure, complete uncertainty and grief, but eventually.
There was creativity.
That's good news. I like that. I like that. But it was also, I'm sure there were things going on. Pastor Kaufman came at some point after that through the synod. He taught, and he was still, he's phenomenal at his Crossways teaching, and he spends a lot of time on that in what's called the intertestamental period. The period that, so if you're working your way through the Bible, you don't get to Malachi and then like the next day wake up and Matthew happens. There's this gap of time between when the Old Testament was locked and finished and before the New Testament started. That intertestamental period is vital for the development of heaven, hell, what happens to you after you die. That was a big worry of the intertestamental period, and I would imagine Pastor Kaufman spends a lot of time on that. The Old Testament and really the New Testament do not have what I would call a clear definition of what happens to you when you die. Meaning, like you can say to me, what's Luke about? And I can say, Jesus said, I came to seek and save the lost. Boom. Pretty clear. Like, and then you read the rest of the book and you're like, yes, I don't really have a great verse that I can say this one perfectly explains. Paul talks a lot about what happens to people when they die, what happens when Jesus comes back. The Bible's clear about there being a Sheol and being a paradise, but it isn't always clear. All the details about, and I guess to me where I sit, I think in part that's because we haven't been there. And it's kind of hard to explain a thing that you haven't been to. But even, the book of Revelation tries to unpack what these things might look like. I don't really know what Jesus is promising this person on the cross, other than not punishment.
Isn't it forgiveness?
You're right. He's promising him forgiveness. He's promising him presence in the eternity in the presence of God. But if you're asking exactly what these places look like, that's difficult. I mean, the Bible is that's a thing we could talk about for weeks and weeks and weeks. It talks in here, Hamilton talks about Hades or Sheol. So to me, Hades is much more of a Greek and Roman idea, although he says, it's in Judaism, which it probably was. Sheol is the Jewish idea of what happens when you die. And my sense of that, so like there's Psalms that'll say, I descended into Sheol. My sense of what Sheol is that it's just a blank place with nothing. And that paradise is some realm in contact with the now ascended Jesus, with God, not with nothing. I don't know that you can turn on a cartoon like Tom and Jerry and be like, well, see this guy in the white beard, that's what the Bible says it looks like. I just don't know that I can do that. But the Bible has these two places, one that isn't good and one that is, and Jesus is promising this sort of presence or this good news place to this person. I would not consider myself a biblical expert on heaven and hell, so I'm not the best person to... Pastor Kaufman, I think, probably did that better than I would do that, but he did that through Crossways and a lot of study and a lot of time on that. So I don't know if you remember things he talked about with Sheol and Paradise, and that was a big... He's really good at that one. Pastor...
Well, and there were the different sects, S-E-C.
Yeah, be very clear.
Yeah, let's get
Sects.
sects, get the T in there. That wasn't the Essenes who actually saw that, there was a, quote, place that was not always in anguish, but that it was,
So,
like he says here, is paradise, it's for the righteous. It's not, the other one they always...
the Sadducees are sad, you see, because they don't believe in the resurrection.
That's right.
The Pharisees do. And sometimes when Jesus is approached with, and it'll give you a framework, and it'll say who's approaching him, and they'll ask a question. Like, we caught this woman in adultery, and she with not her husband, and she's been married, and who's she going to be with in heaven? And they're institutionally trapping him. They're institutionally having these different groups that occupy the Sanhedrin and don't get along, posing a question to him, and he'll usually gives answers that answer it but don't make either of them. It confuses both groups. He doesn't trigger. There's a lot of what people believe going on. Have you ever walked into a church or into a place like a person's home who are faithful people and said something that was like not their theology? It's like a thing that you believe but they don't. I don't know if I have a good example of that, but I'm betting all of us have experienced it. I don't know. Lutherans don't tend to focus a lot on millennialism. Millennialism is like Revelation, like the tribulation and living on earth for 1,000 years and what doesn't. But there are people who really do. I have, and this isn't a Lutheran thing, this is a John thing, I hold what's called a realized eschatology. So eschatology is the study of the end times and God sorting everybody out and going to heaven or hell, and I have a realized eschatology, which means, to me, Jesus goes to the cross to begin the start of the end times. It's begun already in Christ. So this battle between good and evil and who's going to go to heaven is the cross. And it starts there. And Jesus has gone to Jerusalem attacking what he thinks is what I think we all see is a broken system invoking the end time, trying to make a better place for people. And one of the frustrating things about being a Christian is I look at the news today and it looks just as broken. And it's frustrating that it's been, I mean, like, we want to talk about what will happen when Jesus comes back and when the tribulation will come. I think we've been living in the tribulation for a long time with people killing people and going to war over stuff. And today I saw this in the paper yesterday that I knew it would affect our area and us. Yesterday I saw that I don't remember the numbers, a significant portion of cuts to the Cleveland Food Bank.
Mm-hmm.
And today it went through that the Akron Canton Food Bank has the same cuts, which I knew as soon as I saw those. I knew before those happened that they were coming. And then I saw it, and then I was like, well, we're next.
How about the Social Security?
Yeah, so I mean, we participate with the food bank. So the Lydia's Pantry is funded 99%, if not more, well, maybe not that high, 90%, but by people, by you all, and by people who know you, who give us contributions. We use the food bank to get deeply discounted food to then give to people without cost. When people say to me, where's the tribulation? I would say, I'm not panicked this morning, because we're going to have to keep figuring out how to give food to people. But it changes, and now you have to figure out with a new issue how to do it. To me, that requires a lot of prayerfulness, a lot of community, and that's the tribulation. I have trouble saying I believe in heaven and hell. I think that Jesus came to save us, to give us a life in heaven and paradise, like he's talking. I don't necessarily know what that will mean, other than proximity to God, freedom from the things that burden you mentally and physically. The Bible seems to talk about a bodily resurrection, and we talk about that in the Creed. And then there's always questions about what happens to people who are cremated, or I don't know. That's why I don't get it. God somehow does this. But I feel like in the meantime, we're in this place that we have to be prayerful, because Jesus came to seek and save the lost, and Jesus found followers and built a church and filled that church with the Holy Spirit, and we're in this, what I would call tribulation.
I think it was $1 million nationwide they've cut to all food banks. That's what I had seen, but I don't know how much individually to each one.
And it's problematic. I've seen other things that deal with cutting aid to inoculations in other countries.
Over $1 billion.
And some of the inoculations will be things, and I'm making this up. I don't have the article right in front of me, so please fact check it. I don't care about that. But I mean, it'll be like malaria or polio, like some pretty straightforward vaccines that won't be able to be delivered.
Well, measles are doing a pretty good hit of damage here.
That's because
recently.
people won't take the vaccine.
Right.
But it's not going to be offered to people in countries
Who have no
where they don't have the vaccine to begin with.
And where they're exposed to those things.
Exposed to.
And still have
Now remember, I
Still
talked
have
about, 10 minutes ago or whatever, I talked about the dietary restrictions of the elite, put them in. We can make all these demands about clean eating because we got all your money and all your free time to eat clean. Jesus came to seek and save the lost means he's siding with the people that don't have the time or don't have the wherewithal to get the vaccines, the food, the stuff. One of the things I think is a huge problem is governmentally the way who are being theologians in government spheres, which I do not think we should be doing. I'm not saying who you should vote for. I'm not saying we know Republican policy, we know Democratic policy. But when it becomes, well, we're doing this because the Bible told me to do it, I have a real problem with that. What we're seeing right now, I don't think you can say I'm doing it because the Bible told me. I think that's an improper translation or interpretation of, if you feel called to do it and it's a hard thing to do and that's who you are and you're Republican and that's who got voted in, that's one thing. But to do it and say, well, the Bible said this is what to do. I think the Bible's pretty clear, especially with Luke, that it's a very different thing than what they're saying. So that's a lot. We've really run the gamut of huge issues today. Jesus really elevates the discourse to huge issues here. In the first half of the book, it's sort of like, who would dislike this guy? He's a good guy, he's taking care of people. Once you get to this section, it really elevates the responsibility to take on Jerusalem.
That's why he went to Jerusalem.
It's why you need a whole church, though.
Yeah.
So pastors don't take on Jerusalem, and you all don't take on Jerusalem. St. Stephen does it. The Northeastern Ohio Synod, the church, the people that you have the relationship. It's sort of a community that does this together. And we don't solve everything, but I would say the food bank, because we're food pantry people, is going to be a sort of tribulation that we take on. I don't know what it's going to mean. I'll wrap up with this, but right as I think it was when Emily was coming in, I was making a list of the grocery stores around here, and I put it in the box of Judy, because I was like, we're going to have to go to all the websites and check their weekly ad and find what's on sale that week, because we may not be able to get it from the food bank. And that it is what it is. I mean, I'm not happy about it, but I'm not over here alarmed about it. We're just going to say here, what do we do to keep trying to feed people? So it's a lot to think about, but it's why we're a congregation together. These aren't problems that we can solve on our own. You did not rewrite that handbook without rules from on high and without other people doing it with you. So you kind of have to have a team here. We'll be into the postscript next week, which is about the resurrection. That's a more fun thing. It's less harrowing to talk about. Is there anybody who would be willing to close us in prayer today?